it's not enough to classify the main antagonist of Kingdom Hearts as simply evil. It's tempting, but it's a bit reductionist to do so. But the more we explore the main antagonists of the Kingdom Hearts series through Kingdom Hearts 3 ReMind to include Kingdom Hearts Union Cross and Dark Road, the more we see that those who we've come to consider as the main villains of the Kingdom Hearts series are a bit more complex than just thirsting after darkness. I would argue that even darkness itself, at least what we saw in Union Cross, seems to have a more nuanced take on matters of the nature of the heart. Many Kingdom Hearts antagonists aren't purely evil, but rather they're reflections of complex ideologies about freedom, fear, and the nature of the heart. Welcome back, y'all. This is your girl, Empowered Muse, and today we're going to explore the philosophies of the main antagonists of the Kingdom Hearts series. And right away, I want to define who I consider as the main antagonists of the series, as well as those who may not fully fit the definition of a villain, whose actions have definitely seemed antagonistic, at least up to this point. I'm also letting y'all know right now that I am including Ansem the Wise in this list because while, yes, he's on the side of good now, that man was not a good man, and he was, for all intents and purposes, antagonistic up to Kingdom Hearts 2. So as far as who I consider to be the main antagonist, I've included pretty much all of the iterations of Xehanort, which include Young Xehanort, post Kingdom Hearts Dark Road, Ansem, Seeker of Darkness, Xemnas, and Old Man or OG Xehanort. I'll also talk about Maleficent, Vanitas, and True Darkness as antagonists, as well as Luxu, the Master of Masters, and like I said before, Ansem the Wise. And the last three are who I basically consider not full-on villain era, at least yet for Luxu and the Master of Masters, but antagonistic enough to include here. So I basically didn't include any of the Disney World villains outside of Maleficent because it honestly would have taken a little too long, but also because we really didn't see any of the Disney villains interact outside of their own world. And they honestly seem to be working for their own goals, but also at the direction or manipulation of someone else, like a Maleficent or one of the members of Organization 13. And it's really the same reasoning with not including all of the Organization 13 members. Again, it would have taken way too long. But also, despite every member definitely having their own motivations, they're working for the greater goal of Xemnas first, and then OG Xehanort in Kingdom Hearts 3. So with each antagonist, we'll be exploring their main philosophy, how that philosophy informed their motivations, and how their motivation informed their plans and actions, and ultimately, did they have any validity? So we're going to put these people on trial. So as far as the order of analysis, I'll start with the iterations of Xehanort, in chronological order, then jump to Maleficent, then Vanitas, True Darkness, Luxu, the Master of Masters, and finally Ansem the Wise. So starting off with Young Xehanort. Young Xehanort's philosophy is arguably based in his fear or maybe his disdain for stagnation. Even when we see him in Dark Road, Young Xehanort shows not only this persistent sense of nuance and devil's advocate, but also this desire to move things forward for the sake of some sort of progress. I think we see the apex of young Xehanort's philosophy informing his motivations and future actions in his conversation with the Master of Masters in both Kingdom Hearts Dark Road and Kingdom Hearts 3 ReMind. And it's not necessarily his experiences that he feels are stagnated at this point, but rather the sense of humanity's state. The cycle of how people have become tainted by darkness that young Xehanort sees on his journey causes him to feel this frustration at the state of humanity, and it's therefore what propels him to consider working towards finding out how to summon Kingdom Hearts and just wipe the slate clean for a new beginning.
Can't let that slide?
No. It's better they be ruled by darkness. People carry delusions of having power, but it's a lie. They are but sheep pretending to be wolves. Though I admit, I can understand why.
Additionally, we could also say that due to young Xehanort's age at this time, his philosophy is also sort of based in this sense of rebellion. For his observations of humanity's nature and how people tend to seek after power in darkness, his resolve for those sheep pretending to be wolves to be ruled by darkness could also hint at his sense of rebellion, considering he's coming from a place where Keyblade wielders are imposing light in these situations as the status quo. So Xehanort deciding to take the path of darkness is actually a form of rebellion against the status quo and perhaps rebelling against his own fate. Young Xehanort rebelling against his own fate would more so stem from the belief that Xehanort was in fact the child of destiny as prophesied. According to his caretaker, who we found out was Player at the end of Dark Road, the child of destiny was to become Light's master and change the outcome that darkness would prevail over light. And there is sort of this argument that Xehanort technically eventually did this, but not as Light's master, but by being the catalyst that called forth Kingdom Hearts. However, I think what makes more sense is that young Xehanort rebelled against this prophecy that was assumed to refer to him as the child of destiny because he saw just how feeble the nature of the heart is. And frankly, he lost faith. This revelation is what causes him to become this more cynical, arrogant version of young Xehanort that we see specifically in Dream Drop Distance and Kingdom Hearts 3. So as far as whether young Xehanort's motivations and eventual actions had any validity, I would say, not really. Xehanort's loss of faith in humanity seems to be the main thing that permanently alters his philosophy, and therefore his motivations and actions. It's not that he doesn't have a point about how feeble the heart is in the face of power and darkness, but his actions from that point on went to this extreme cynicism that impacted how he moved throughout his life. Ansem, Seeker of Darkness. When we meet Ansem, Seeker of Darkness in Kingdom Hearts 1, his main philosophy seems to be to gain power of darkness through absorbing as much knowledge as possible, whether that knowledge was stolen or otherwise. Ansem, Seeker of Darkness is actually pretty interesting because he's introduced as this sort of scholar who basically got tunnel vision over darkness, mechanisms of the heart, and the door to Kingdom Hearts. And if we take what we've witnessed of this particular era, and I guess iteration of Xehanort from Kingdom Hearts 1 through flashbacks in Kingdom Hearts 2, and his essence in Kingdom Hearts Chain of Memories, and reappearance in Kingdom Hearts Dream Drop Distance and Kingdom Hearts 3, then Ansem, Seeker of Darkness's personality has been fairly consistent with this philosophy of seeking out power through knowledge. And despite Ansem, Seeker of Darkness being enthralled with darkness and about the most open to seeing darkness as a necessity, the way in which his obsession with darkness and his motivations for seeking and gaining power come through is via the manipulation of others, primarily Riku, but also Maleficent in Kingdom Hearts 1. I think Ansem, Seeker of Darkness's obsession with darkness is best illustrated in his speech that he gives in Kingdom Hearts 1 on the Destiny Islands before the final battle with him begins.
All worlds begin in darkness, and all so end. The heart is no different. Darkness sprouts within it. It grows, consumes it. Such is its nature. In the end, every heart returns to the darkness whence it came. You see, darkness is the heart's true.
And we get different versions of the same sentiment in Chain of Memories and Dream Drop Distance when he tries to convince Riku to take the path of darkness. So while young Xehanort and OG Xehanort are primarily working towards this overarching goal to control humanity with darkness, Ansem, Seeker of Darkness is working on a more individual level, which OG Xehanort also did to bring these more powerful Keyblade wielders to the side of darkness in order to exploit just how easy it is to bring even a strong heart over to darkness. I think as far as whether there was any validity to Ansem, Seeker of Darkness's philosophy and methods, again, there's this argument that he wasn't fully wrong with what he might have come across in his research and in the mere fact that yes, people can be manipulated, but his actual actions of manipulating others was not valid at all, especially because it was mainly for the sake of exploitation and not even for the greater argument of how one could theoretically benefit from darkness. Moving on to Xemnas. Xemnas is a cult leader. Next question. Okay, seriously. I mean, Xemnas very much has the makings of a cult leader, especially when you think of how he put together this organization of nobodies who were basically these lost souls looking for something important or who were following their close friends to make sure they didn't wind up becoming lost. So Xemnas' philosophy is pretty much based in fear and loneliness. Specifically, Xemnas' actions and the way in which he runs Organization 13 reflects his aversion to those feelings of fear and loneliness. Of the iterations of Xehanort that we see, Xemnas is ironically the most emotional iteration, but the one who openly rails against negative emotions in both Kingdom Hearts 2 and Kingdom Hearts 3. Which leads me to believe that Xemnas doesn't have much of a philosophy and motivating factors outside of insecurity. But its positioning and founding of Organization 13 from taking over Ansem the Wise's lab leads those who work for him to view him as this authority figure that could lead them to something greater. So obviously because I'm biased and already sort of sees him as this sort of cult leader, it's actually quite hard for me to see that he had any validity at all. He might actually be one of the least valid antagonists, if I'm being real. And it's really because we're hard pressed to see Xemnas' philosophy and motivating factors as anything more than insecurity and an aversion to more difficult and raw emotions like pain and fear and loneliness. Xemnas' emotional suppression is sort of the root of his power, and that might honestly be true of all of Xehanort's iterations, to include OG Xehanort, but I think we see this more explicitly with Xemnas. Moving on to the Old Man. So Old Man Xehanort, aka OG Xehanort, has pretty much a similar philosophy to that of Young Xehanort. In fact, it was Young Xehanort's realizations about the matters of the heart that led OG Xehanort to his later actions. But through Kingdom Hearts 3, it seems that OG Xehanort sort of fine-tuned his philosophy to reflect what he believes is a philosophy of blind justice. While that disdain for stagnation of humanity's relationship with darkness is still present, this version of Xehanort has now reasoned that he is the one to bring forth this sense of blind justice that's needed to create a blank slate for humanity.
But the first light, the light of Kingdom Hearts, it can give us a new start. An empty world, pure and bright.
Instead of becoming a ruler through darkness, this older version of Xehanort has decided to call upon darkness as a tool in order to bring forth a blank slate for all and sort of guide everyone in his version of the right direction. So OG Xehanort's solution isn't quite as volatile as Young Xehanort's, but that doesn't mean that OG Xehanort didn't see the need to use others for his own gain. It was OG Xehanort, after all, who created Vanitas, a form of pure darkness, in order to clash with Vanitas, a being who is of pure light, manipulated Terra, killed Ericus because he knew he'd try to stop him from what he was planning to do, and recreated Organization 13 only to use them as his vessels. However, his argument for doing all of this horrible shit was that the world was already horrible, people were already seeking out darkness and were already being awful, and he was merely doing all this in order to wipe the slate and clear out all of the horribleness that currently existed. And in his eyes, because the state of humanity was already tainted by darkness and needed a fresh start, OG Xehanort was merely bringing forth the sense of blind justice as the assumed but unconfirmed child of destiny. OG Xehanort had one of the more nuanced, albeit still misguided, philosophies on humanity and the state of the world, and there could even be those who might consider seeing his motivations as valid. If you look past all of the killing and the body hijacking. But you can still get a sense of some form of validity because he's not necessarily wrong about the state of the world, not defending it, but he's not necessarily wrong. But at the same time, he's not the person to bring forth the sense of blind justice because his views are very much skewed and have been very much skewed this whole time. Moving on to Maleficent. Maleficent's philosophy is basically based on this ultimate thirst for power. She doesn't really seem to care about anything that's not impacting her, and unlike Ansem, Seeker of Darkness, she's also not doing this from an intellectually curious standpoint. She just wants power and believes that power, specifically the power of darkness, is what should rule overall. Moreover, she believes that she is the one deserving of that power of darkness. So her desire to acquire these things like more darkness, more powers, black box of secrets is only for her growth and power and for her preservation. And this is also kind of why I chose Maleficent as the Disney villain in this analysis, because her philosophy is really simple and not nuanced at all, but she goes to further lengths than her Disney counterparts in achieving it because she time travels and stalks around Xehanort and Organization 13 to find a way to get these things. Even when she assisted Sora in Kingdom Hearts 2 against the organization, it was ultimately for her own preservation since she wanted to reclaim her castle and therefore her territory. And no, none of this is really valid at all, but Maleficent's addition to the conversation was mainly to show that she was really one of the most one-dimensional main villains in the series, and that she was really out for power for the sake of power. Moving on to Vanitas. Vanitas is another villain who has a simpler philosophy compared to some of the other main villains in the series, and his philosophy is basically guided by this sense of chaotic evil. No real thoughts, just dark vibes. Because it's suspected that Vanitas is at least some of the true darkness that's locked within Ventus, personified through Xehanort's extraction, it's not surprising at all that Vanitas has exhibited this extreme sense of nihilism about life and humanity in Birth by Sleep and in Kingdom Hearts 3. That's why we see Vanitas going to such great lengths to bring such pain and suffering to the likes of Ven and Aqua, because nothing is really guiding his motivations outside of this nihilistic attitude about humanity and darkness. However, something of interest that we do see is just how much Vanitas clings to this and is resigned to just be darkness by the time he's defeated in Kingdom Hearts 3. It's actually not that controversial an argument, and logically makes sense that Vanitas' role is to just exist as darkness, nothing more, nothing less.
But... Ventus, I did decide who I am. You see?
And what you are is darkness?
What I am is darkness.
So in a sense, Vanitas was valid in choosing who he wanted to be, who he felt that he needed to be. His actions were still horrible, but by him actively choosing to be darkness instead of blaming his actions on some external or even internal pressures, Vanitas ultimately validated his identity. Therefore, his course of actions took place because of his resignation that he not only belonged to darkness, but that he was in fact the embodiment of darkness. Speaking of darkness, we're moving on to the true darkness, the entities that are true darkness, at least from what we've seen in Kingdom Hearts Union Cross. And they're very interesting in the sense that they are, in one way, pretty one-dimensional as far as their overall goals and motivations, but their philosophies appear a little more complex than expected. The true darkness entities in Union Cross have this base philosophy that's rooted in, well, darkness, obviously, and thus finding any dark aspect of humanity appealing. But it seems that these entities also have a philosophy that's rooted in this thirst for corruption, because corruption is actually what's essential to their overall survival. This need to not only survive, but thrive is due to the ongoing entangled battle of light and darkness, and because darkness has given up its physical form, it's aiming to expand its presence through the hearts of others in order to have its sense of will remain intact. And so it's because of its overall desire to survive and expand that darkness has become quite adaptable in interacting and even taking advantage of humans and the feebleness of the human heart over time. Darkness over time has become such a strategic and calculating force that even the Master of Masters has recognized it as the sort of admirable and cunning foe. And we see just how almost relatable darkness can be when we see it talking to Luxu and to the Master of Masters in Union Cross. So darkness is definitely this master manipulator in order for it to find the most feasible ways to survive by exploiting the darker parts of humanity and thereby expanding its numbers through these physical beings that we now recognize as heartless. In one sense, these entities of true darkness claim that their philosophy in corruption and darkness is merely for the sake of their survival. And that brings about the question of whether the desire to survive is in itself valid. Ultimately, the validity of true darkness's existence might lend to other questions, such as what is light without darkness, and can darkness ever truly cease to exist? But what we can't obviously say right now is that darkness's expansion through the corruption of others isn't a valid action, because that in itself rejects the notion that darkness wants nothing more than to simply exist. So this final section includes those who aren't outright antagonists, at least right now, but their actions have raised enough eyebrows to be considered antagonistic leading up to the Lost Master arc. So let's start with Luxu. Luxu's philosophy might actually be the most unclear or maybe just the most malleable of the antagonists throughout the series. Luxu has exhibited a long game worldview that's mainly based in loyalty, begrudging loyalty at this point, a loyalty to a mostly unseen master. However, what appears to be happening is that we're seeing a transition of Luxu's philosophy and motivations from being based in a lawful good or maybe just lawful neutral manner to a more chaotic neutral manner. We see Luxu go from someone who was very loyal to the Master of Masters to seemingly starting to act out based on his disappointment in the Master of Masters once he revealed the plan to use himself, the Foretellers, and the Dandelion leaders as vessels for these entities of true darkness. Despite Lucius' desire to be rid of these true darknesses, he did balk at the suggestion of using particularly the Dandelion leaders as these sacrificial vessels. So as a sort of response to this revelation, we see Luxu doing more questionable things in Union Cross and beyond, like taking what appeared to be Strelitzia's body and placing it in one of the lifeboat arcs as a true Dandelion, and even undergoing a personality shift as he's traversed from vessel to vessel to vessel, up to when he's used Braid or Zigbar as his final vessel. There's also the standing question of whether Luxu might have gotten corrupted with darkness along the way as he awaited the fated Dark Master to reenact the Keyblade War, since his eyes remain that golden yellow color that we saw all of Organization 13 had in Kingdom Hearts 3. So since Luxu's eyes didn't change colors in the epilogue of Kingdom Hearts 3, I think there's this question of whether he might actually be corrupted now, and therefore his original worldview and philosophy is null and void, at least until he's no longer corrupted. That said, I think there was some validity to Luxu's more spontaneous actions because he seemed to have been guided by this desire for lawfulness. Whether it's for an overall good or just an overall sense of neutrality, and his willingness to even get to the point of disagreeing with aspects of the Master and Master's plans shows that Luxu wasn't fully resigned to just this blind loyalty in the long run. However, it will be interesting to see in this next arc just where Luxu's loyalties lie and whether his overall philosophy has been corrupted over time by one of the entities of true darkness. Moving on to the Master and Masters. The Master and Masters philosophy is another fairly complex one to where I see him and OG Xehanort as being two sides of the same coin because they both kind of want the same thing and are willing to do very similar things to achieve that. From the beginning, the Master and Masters presented this more chaotic, neutral manner of thinking despite being someone who's supposedly full of light and who hates the presence of true darkness because of what happened to him in his childhood. But if we really look at the Master and Master's philosophy around war against darkness and his exploitation in human nature, he presents this moral ambiguity basically from the minute he appears on screen. So I do think perhaps because of his early traumas that he faced in his childhood, the Master and Masters did wind up developing this philosophy that light must prevail at all costs, whether that's at the cost of himself or the cost of his apprentices or anyone else who could be of use. And I think because the Master of Masters is so strategic in how he convinces his apprentices to take on these roles and how he pulls out Xehanort's desires to go down the path of darkness as opposed to the path of light, that he doesn't come off as this agent of light, but rather this agent of chaos. So outside of himself, and maybe not even outside of his own self, everyone is a tool that can be used to rid the world of darkness, as long as they're willing to be involved in this long strategic game of war. And again, I honestly think this is more so the Master and Master's past trauma that's informing this worldview and motivation, because if you've lost everything you cared about to darkness as a kid, then what's the point of getting attached to anything while there's this ongoing existential war between light and darkness? That's pretty dark. But this is why I do think the Master of Masters does come off as this more cynical character, and that cynicism was very much on display as he explained his master plan to Luxu in Union Cross. So when it comes to the question of whether the Master of Masters philosophy and motivations are valid, I mean, you can definitely see the argument of why the Master is going down this very absolutist path based on what he went through as a kid. That said, again, like Xehanort, this is a very skewed and extreme view on which to base your philosophy and plans of action. So for the Master to think this plan will ultimately rid of darkness without the risk that a darkness might corrupt the vessel to go rogue, like Luxu, for example, might actually point to how short-sighted the Master's plan could be. Ansem the Wise. So let's talk about Ansem the Wise. He's horrible. But he's horrible in the sense that his philosophy, at least before he sought atonement after being yeeted to the realm of darkness, whatever, his philosophy was apparently science and research at all costs. And that cost was particularly children. Other humans as well, I'm sure, but children. Awful, awful man. May this thirst for knowledge never find me. Anyways, let me get a serious analysis out. Ansem the Wise basically put the laws of science and knowledge above anything else. His leading philosophy that informed his motivations and actions was to seek more knowledge, use anyone and anything around you as tools in order to obtain these new levels of knowledge. So in this sense, Ansem the Wise was very much lawful evil coded. And yes, people did know Ansem the Wise as this kind ruler slash overseer of Radiant Garden at the peak of his career, but that still doesn't negate his mistreatment of his subjects of the heart when he ran his experiments. And we saw the extent to which Ansem the Wise would go in his motivations and actions in 358 Over 2 Days and Kingdom Hearts 2 when he sought revenge against Terra Xehanort, who was his assistant, through using Roxas and Naminé. And because knowledge and revenge were basically his two primary motivations, Ansem the Wise didn't really seem to have a strong moral compass until later in Kingdom Hearts 2, right before his heart to data machine exploded and sent him to the realm of darkness. But I guess since now he's on his atonement tour, that we'll see a more nuanced and fleshed out Ansem the Wise who will hopefully learn to value ethical scientific research, especially when it comes to experiments dealing with people. And as far as whether Ansem the Wise's initial philosophy and motivations are valid, absolutely not. Knowledge is great, but not at the expense of people. He basically had a purely selfish philosophy and motivations until he saw the consequences of his actions and had to pay the price because, once again, he was yeeted to the realm of darkness. The main antagonists of Kingdom Hearts and Ansem the Wise were more than just embodiments of evil. They actually gave us a nuanced look at human nature and matters of the heart when it comes to these more complex negative emotions like fear, insecurity, revenge, and even this idea of freedom and justice, and who really should be the arbiters of justice. It wasn't enough to see these themes through the eyes of our heroes, but it was necessary that we saw these ideas through the antagonist's perspectives as well. I have been talking a lot. But I want to hear from you, so let me know what you think about these antagonists and their philosophies in the comments below. If you want to explore some more Kingdom Hearts theories, I'll be linking another Kingdom Hearts theory video here in the end screen. And as always, be sure to hit the like button and subscribe to this channel if you enjoyed this video and want to watch more Kingdom Hearts content. And if there's anyone who may have questions about what to expect for the upcoming Kingdom Hearts game, be sure to share this video. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you next time.